So License to Drive was the very first filming location video that I ever uploaded, and I think that since then, my video making skills have gotten at least a little bit better. Also, in that original video, there was a lot of locations that weren't included because I just didn't know where they were. I also think that my detective skills have gotten a little bit better. And since License to Drive is one of my top 5 favorite movies of all time, I decided to just get rid of that original video, reshoot the entire thing with all brand new footage, include a bunch of locations that weren't in the original video, and talk about the deleted scenes. And I'm really excited to be able to do this just in time for what would have been Corey Haim's 50th birthday. So buckle up, because today we're going to take a look at filming locations for the 1988 Corey Haim and Corey Feldman classic, License to Drive. Let's go see what we can find. So the movie begins with Les having a dream while asleep in class, more specifically, driver's ed class. Les is having a dream that he's trapped on the bus and he's trying to escape. And we see the bus pull up to a stoplight right here at this intersection. And that house right there on the left can be seen very well in the shot. But what happened to the stoplight? Well, it was never actually here. If you pay really close attention to that scene, you can actually see that the stoplight is hanging from a crane. Once the bus driver realizes that Les is trying to escape, he takes off, letting out a maniacal laugh. And once the bus driver realizes that Les escaped out the back window, he turns the bus around, bringing it up onto 3 wheels. And that happens just at the end of the block from where the bus was just stopped, right here in front of this house. And much like the intersection that we were just standing in, this house still looks exactly the same. Les then runs back to the intersection where it all started, finding Mercedes waiting for him in the red Ferrari, which would have been parked right here in front of this house. And again, it looks just like it did. He looks and notices the bus is coming right towards him, but that's actually shot down the street back here where the bus comes up on 3 wheels. Les jumps in the Ferrari and rounds the corner right in front of the house and takes off down the street. We then see them coming down this street, which is about a mile away from where they just were, and they pass through this intersection and right past this stone wall. So I've said before that every once in a while I show up to a new location and it makes me feel like I'm in the movie. And this neighborhood was one of those locations, considering everything here looks like it did in 1988. Man, this neighborhood is probably one of my favorite locations that I've filmed in a while. For the end of the dream, we find ourselves in downtown Los Angeles. Now, it doesn't actually show this shot in the movie, but Les would have been coming from down there and then made a left into that alley right there. And this is the shot of the buildings we get in the background behind Les. He would have been driving straight down that alley, right towards this building. You can see it for a split second, and right about there is where those gas pumps and that gas truck would have been. Les would have been heading down the alley right here, coming straight towards where I'm standing. Les then throws the match behind him, causing not only the bus driver, but a bus full of children to drive into a wall of fire. Think about that for a minute. This is Walter Reed Middle School, and it was the location of Les's high school. We see Les come walking out these doors trying to catch the bus. Notice that brickwork going around the archway and that spiderweb-like window above the doors. Les comes running down the stairs and out onto the front lawn trying to catch the bus, but it's too late. He sees it driving off down the street. And as he's standing here watching the bus drive away, he sees Paulo drive up in his Ferrari to pick up Mercedes, who would have been sitting right there on that bench. And that's when we first see Dean. He comes riding down the sidewalk right here on his bike. And for some reason, Les is standing out here in the street. Paulo almost hits him with his car, but speeds past Les and Dean, who were standing right here in front of the school. Dean and Les are speeding down the hill all through Les's neighborhood, but they're going so fast that it's kind of hard to tell what houses they're going by. However, we do get a clear shot of them passing by this house while another guy on a bike is going up the hill. We see them riding down the sidewalk, and as they hit the grass, Les goes flying off the handlebars onto the front lawn. This is, of course, Les Anderson's house, and besides a few updates, a new picket fence, and some trees, the house still looks really similar. Les would have landed on the front lawn right there, and as Dean's setting his bike down, he notices the Cadillac sitting right there in the driveway because Les's dad is cleaning out the garage, making room for the Cadillac. Not as recognizable with the gate closed, but this is the house where Les, Dean, and Charles go to the party. Dean's mom would have come driving down the street right here and pulled up right in front of the house. Of course, Les and Dean are freaking out and telling her just to keep driving and drop them off down the street. They would have come up the street and made a left onto this street, pulling over somewhere right over here in front of all these bushes. And that's when the car would have come from down this way and pulled up right here and made the rude statement to Dean's mom. Now that's the first time that we see those three guys, but of course it's not the last. They then drive off this way, and this whole area over here looks a bit different. This school campus wouldn't have been here at the time. This would have all just been houses. Les and Dean come walking down the street right here, and we see them walk right past this street sign and street lamp. It appears to be the exact same street lamp that they walk by. As they're making their way into the party, Charles has his mom drop him off right here in front of the front gate, and Les and Dean try and quickly move into the party so people don't realize that they're friends with Charles. Right here is where the school bus would have been parked, and they're all getting on it when Dean points out to Les that Mercedes is sitting on a bench right over there. Les decides to go up and talk to her, and as he's approaching her, Les's dad pulls up right here. You can actually tell exactly where Les's dad pulls up by this and by that window on the house back there.
Les, it's me, Papa!
Les, of course, gets embarrassed and runs off. He comes running around the corner right here, but we're now in a completely different area. That's a totally different school. We're actually back in Les's neighborhood. Les's dad comes around the corner in the Cadillac, and he pulls up right here. We see the Cadillac come driving down this street, right past this white brick wall, and it comes to a stop sign. And that's when Les notices Mercedes walking across the street past this house. As Les is trying to convince his dad to let him take the car to go impress Mercedes, you can see this wall behind Les's dad and this house behind Les. So he finally convinces his dad to let him take the car.
Hey, let's give her a clue!
We see Mercedes moving further down the street, right past this fire hydrant. And she's walking right past this house when Les approaches her. Pay attention to this window right here. So Les turns off of that street right there and approaches Mercedes, and his dad would have been standing right there on the corner. And of course, his dad watches as Les and Mercedes drive off down the street that way. This is the location of Mercedes' friend's house in Cedarwood, and it turns out Cedarwood's only about a mile away from where Les originally picks up Mercedes. Now, much like some of the other locations that we've been seeing, this house looks almost identical to how it did in the movie. However, the houses across the street that we see behind Les are completely different. If you've ever driven down the 110 freeway through downtown Los Angeles, the odds are you've passed right by this DMV, and this is the DMV where Les Anderson takes his driving test. So after getting a pass to move on to the driving portion of the test, we see Les walk out of these doors, and he walks right past this same bench and lamppost. Les heads over this way and gets into the car, which would have been parked right about here. And in the background, you can see a big church, which is no longer there. After getting a lecture from the late great James Avery, aka Uncle Phil, and learning the rules of the coffee cup, Les heads out this driveway and onto the city streets. This is where Les is sitting in traffic during his driving exam. Notice that liquor store sign that in the movie said Market, and also the off-ramp for the 2 freeway. This is where Natalie, Les's sister, is taking her driving test. She passes right by this house, and then the instructor tells her, "Let's see how you handle this hill." Right here on the corner of Alvarado and Baxter, this is the steep hill that Les is coming up during his driving exam, and the elderly couple comes up behind him and they're honking their horn. This house right here on the right can be seen in that shot. And in real life, the hill really is as steep as it looks in the movie. Now, I can't say 100% for sure, but I believe that this is where Les's sister is parallel parking, right here at Holmby Park. So after taking his road test, Les passes under the 110 freeway, turns into this driveway, and back into the parking lot of the DMV. And right here, he almost hits the girl that's passing in front of him. Les hits the brakes and comes to a screeching stop, causing the coffee cup to land on James Avery's lap. But of course, the coffee cup was empty and Les passes his driving test. I gotta say, it's really cool to see this DMV look the same as it did in 1988. It even still has this design up here on the building. After Les fails his driving test, we see him sadly walking down this sidewalk as a VW full of teenagers passes by him. This was filmed in front of Mercedes' friend's house, the same one that he dropped her off at earlier in the movie. After getting a phone call from Mercedes, Les decides to sneak the car out of the garage and go pick her up for their date. Now at the time there would have been bushes right here where this fence now is. Les forgets to put the car in park and the car goes rolling through these bushes right out into the street. Not too far from Les's house, this is the home of Mercedes Lane, and it's another one that looks almost identical to how it did in the movie. Les would have parked right here in front of the house and then walked up to the front door. Everything at the front door appears to be exactly the same as well. The Rey Theater is where Les and Mercedes begin their date. We see them pull up right here in front of the Rey Theater to the valet, but once Les sees the way the valet is treating the cars, he decides there's no way he's going to let him drive the Cadillac, and he drives off, leaving the valet standing there asking for a tip even though he did nothing.
Hey, what's up, my tip?
They happen to find a parking spot directly across the street, and Les notices a no parking anytime sign right here on this lamppost. But Mercedes assures him that that doesn't apply to Saturday nights. Not sure where she learned that. We see them cross the street and head into the El Rey, passing right by this ticket booth. Mercedes heads inside the club through these doors, but unfortunately Les gets stopped by the guy with the hair. After Mercedes runs into Paulo and his new girlfriend, she gets upset, grabs a bottle of champagne, and comes running out these doors, and Les runs up to check if she's okay, but then he notices that the Cadillac's getting towed away across the street. Les comes running out into the middle of the street and almost gets hit by multiple cars right here. And as the tow truck's driving away, Les jumps onto the front of it and starts pleading with the tow truck driver not to tow his car. He finally gets the truck driver to stop right here after telling him he'll give him all the money that he has in his wallet. We then see the truck driver driving off right here laughing at Les. We then see Les and Mercedes standing in this very spot, leaning up against the car, trying to decide what they're going to do next now that Les has no money. On the DVD commentary, the director mentions that this scene was filmed somewhere below the Hollywood sign. However, I can't find any view from the Hollywood sign that matches up with this one. and even if I could, it would be almost impossible to figure out the exact spot where Les and Mercedes go to. After they cave in the hood of the car, Les brings it to Dean's house, which used to be located right here. Unfortunately, a few years ago, the house was torn down and completely rebuilt and looks nothing like it did. After Dean convinces Les to take them out for a night on the town, we see them pull out of this driveway and head down the street right here. Charles and Les and Dean decide to start off their evening here in San Pedro, driving down Pacific Avenue, and we see them pass right by this building. As they pass through the intersection, a street sweeper turns off of 7th Street and passes right by them. As they get to the next corner, they pull up to a stoplight that's not actually here in real life. It was just placed here for the movie. And that's when the guys pull up next to them and challenge them to a street race. This is where they were driving down the freeway when Les and Dean get into a struggle and the flash goes off on the camera, blinding Les and causing him to lose control. They pass right by these signs right here. The car then veers off the freeway and takes the exit for Harbor Scenic Drive. Right here at the bottom of the exit is where the car heads through the giant puddle of water, and Les uses both feet on the brake, causing the car to spin out of control. Right here in the middle of this intersection is where the car would have spun out of control. Now this is where things get a little weird. Right over here is a fence that matches up exactly with the one that they go crashing through. However, on the other side of this fence, there's no hill. It's a shipping yard and it's all flat ground. So I'm not sure if they shot this scene in two different places and maybe duplicated this fence somewhere else, or if there used to be a hill on the other side of this fence, but this is definitely the spot where the car comes off the freeway and spins out of control, and this fence definitely matches up with the one that we see in the movie. Right here in this shopping center, just about where this Chase Bank now is, used to be a Shakey's Pizza. And of course, it was the Shakey's Pizza where we see the Cadillac skid right into a parking space after they crashed through the fence. Now, right across the street from the Shakey's Pizza used to be a used car lot right here where this apartment building now is. You can actually see that used car lot behind them when they're putting Mercedes into the trunk, and we'll talk more about that used car lot later in this video. Bob's Big Boy Broiler was the location of Archie's Atomic. At the time of filming, it was Johnny's Broiler, and after closing down and almost being torn down, Bob's Big Boy saved it and turned it into Bob's Big Boy Broiler. The Cadillac comes into the parking lot through this driveway and then pulls into the third spot from the end. There would have been a bunch of payphones right over here by this stone wall, and we see them getting out of the car and checking out the scene at Archie's. Now they're walking down this path right here when Dean spots a few girls sitting on the hood of their car. They would have been sitting right over here. Charles opens his door into the car of the 3 dropouts, which is how they're listed in the credits of the movie. One of the guys jumps on the hood of the Cadillac, and Les backs out of the spot and flips around right here and then heads out the driveway and down the street that way. The 3 dropouts try and chase after them, but they end up crashing into another car right here. I really love that Bob's Big Boy kept things almost exactly the same with the look of the building. One of the few things that's different is right up there where it says Bob's Big Boy. That's where the Johnny's Broiler mascot used to be. But he's not gone, they just moved him to the back of the parking lot. I also really love this original drive-through sign that they kept, which can be seen in License to Drive.
Archie's! Come back! Come back! Come back!
After leaving Archie's, we see the car traveling down this street right here. And as they approach these railroad tracks in front of me, Les sees his mom's Audi being towed through the intersection. They make a right turn onto this street, and as they do, they see the police and military behind them. Now right over here, this is where all the protesters were standing, and they go running towards the Cadillac as they see it approaching. Now, the Cadillac would have been driving down the street right here, and all the protesters run up and start pounding on the car. This building right here, this was Ally Tech, and we get almost this exact shot during a behind-the-scenes interview where Haim and Corey Feldman are sitting right here in front of this building. The Cadillac comes out of this shipping yard. At the time, there would have been a building right over here that's no longer there, but if you look really closely in that scene, you can just barely see the Vincent Thomas Bridge in the background. The Cadillac makes a right turn onto Terminal Way and heads down the street. Now, this next scene is a bit tricky because it's filmed in two completely different places. As they're approaching the police roadblock, they're on Terminal Way in San Pedro. When we actually see the police roadblock, we're now in downtown Los Angeles. This building right here is a newer building and blocks the bridge that we see in the movie, but the bridge is still there behind this building. As the police tell them to pull over, we're now back in San Pedro. Notice that's a completely different style of fence, and you can see some shipping containers in the background and the lights of the shipping yard. We're back in downtown Los Angeles for the rest of the scene. Once again, notice how the fence has completely changed, the shipping containers are gone, and there's now a small brick building. These buildings across the street can be seen a few times throughout that scene, especially after the police drive away. You can also see the drunk walking around in circles behind them. The drunk gets in the Cadillac and drives off this way towards the bridge, and as we walk down the street this way, you can now see a bit of that bridge peeking out from behind the building. The Cadillac comes down this street, makes a right, and smashes into a car underneath the bridge, causing the bumper to fall off. And if you pay close attention to that scene, you'll notice that it's no longer the drunk driving the car, it's Les. And Charles is in the passenger seat and Dean's in the back seat, and the rear window is now broke out. And I'll explain all of this a bit later in the video. This is where they're driving down the street when Charles is trying to get him to pull over, just before he leans over and pukes in the car. This building, along with this sign for Sunrise Street, can be seen. So he finally starts driving straight, and that's because he's passed out cold as they're going over the 6th Street Bridge. Now, unfortunately, a few years back, they tore down the original 6th Street Bridge, and they're now in the process of rebuilding it. As they approach the end of the 6th Street Bridge, there's construction going on, and funny enough, the road is closed. And there's a big bright light shining right towards the camera to stop you from seeing what's on the other side of the road closure signs. And that's because that construction zone where the Cadillac almost drives right into the pit was located in a completely different place. It was located right here in front of me, and at the time they were building this building. And the way that we can tell that this is the right spot is, one, this building can be seen right in front of them. And two, for just a split second, we get a shot of this building. As the sun comes up, Les drops off Dean and Charles back at Dean's house. The car pulls up and parks right here in front of the driveway. but as Les pulls away, he's now parked across the street facing the opposite direction. He pulls away from the curb and drives down the street this way. The house at the end of the street is completely different, but we do see these two buildings. Les then drops off Mercedes, and as he carries her to the door, we get this view looking across the street. Les comes down the street this way and quietly sneaks into the driveway. Fortunately for him, the verbal bashing that he gets from his father is cut short because his mom's in labor and they need to quickly get her to the hospital. Les is driving down the street right here in reverse because it's the only gear that works. An old lady begins to cross the street and causes Les to drive up onto the sidewalk. As he drives up onto the sidewalk, you can see the reflection of this building in the window. He's driving down the sidewalk right here and you can still see that white building in the background. We also see him pass by all of these arched windows. And of course, right here at the end of the block is where the waiter was setting up the tables that Les crashes through. As he crashes through the tables, you can see this white office building across the street. He comes off the curb, through the intersection, over that divider, and into oncoming traffic. Now, of course, Les was driving in the opposite direction, but this is just to give you an idea of where he was driving. The car is now driving down this street, and over here there's some construction workers doing something with that fire hydrant right there. As the car passes through the water, you can see this house right over here on the left corner. You can also see this tall building that was being built at the time and ends up playing a key role in the end of the movie. They're now driving down the very same street just a bit further down the hill, and we see them driving right towards this construction worker and past these apartment buildings. Right over here, this is where the construction worker would have been standing, and right here, these are the apartment buildings that he's driving by. The car comes down the street, flips around, and ends up parking right here in front of the steps of Elmdale Memorial Hospital, which in reality is actually a Jewish temple, and thankfully it looks almost exactly like it did, except of course it no longer has a hospital sign. This building right here across the street is the one that was under construction at the time of the movie, and we see that large beam fall from the crane and land on top of the car that would have been parked right here. Back at Les's house, his grandfather comes to pick up his Cadillac, and once he finds out it's been destroyed, we see them all standing in the driveway laughing as a tow truck drops off Les's dad's BMW. Les's dad offers it to Les, and that's when Mercedes pulls up across the street. Les lets his dad know,
I already have a Mercedes.
And then runs across the street and hops in the car. Now, unfortunately, the house across the street is now covered by trees. Les jumps in the car, cranks up the Billy Ocean, and drives off down the street. At the end of the block from where Les lives, we see them drive through this intersection and off into the sunset for a perfect 80s movie ending. So let's briefly talk about the deleted scene. On the special edition DVD, there's a 14-minute deleted scene, which is basically an alternate ending. However, it doesn't really have a beginning or an end, so some of it is left to our imagination. Remember earlier in the movie, we see them at the Shakey's Pizza, and in the background you can see a used car dealership. If you look closely in that scene, there's a car on the display stage that looks exactly like Les's grandfather's Cadillac. Well, in the deleted scene, they've somehow switched cars, and Les's grandfather's Cadillac is the one at the dealership. We see Les, Dean, and Charles sitting right here, watching the dealership, coming up with a plan to try and get the Cadillac back. They decide to have Charles test drive the car, and then they'll somehow switch the two vehicles. But while they're watching the dealership, they see the salesman closing up for the night, and guess which car he leaves in. The salesman leaves the dealership in Les's grandfather's Cadillac and heads down the street this way, and Les follows closely behind him. They follow him all the way to downtown Los Angeles. We see them come out of this street, and the salesman pulls up right here in front of this bar. As the salesman heads inside the bar, Les heads across the street to try and find the spare key so they can switch the two cars. But unfortunately, while Les is underneath the car, the three dropouts drive by and recognize Les's car and pull over to get revenge because this is after the incident at Archie's. The three dropouts are wrecking Les's grandfather's Cadillac, and that's how it actually ends up getting damaged because in the alternate ending, the scene with the drunk doesn't exist. Les pops out and puts on a tough guy act to try and get them to stop bashing the car, and then for some reason heads inside the bar to have a drink. Now, the entire time, Dean and Charles are parked across the street right next to the bridge, watching everything that's going on. After a long and drawn-out scene, Les comes running out, they switch Cadillacs, and they drive off over the 7th Street Bridge. But unfortunately, they realize that they left Mercedes in the trunk of the other car, and they head back to get her. While they're taking Mercedes out of one car and putting her in the other, the car salesman is looking out this window right here and notices them messing with the car and comes running outside. They drive off down the street and the salesman pulls out a gun and fires at them and shoots out the back window. And that's how the rear window actually gets broke out. When he shoots the rear window, they lose control of the car and smash into a car underneath the bridge, causing the bumper to fall off. That explains why when the drunk smashes into the car and causes the bumper to fall off, we see Les, Dean, and Charles inside the car, and the rear window is already smashed out, because they reused footage from the alternate ending. Now, luckily, they ended up coming up with a much funnier ending, because the movie just wouldn't have been the same without that entire scene of the drunk stealing their car.
I must have dozed off.
That's all right. You didn't miss a thing.
Okay, so that's gonna do it for this video. I think we did pretty good. I think we got about 95% of all the locations. We at least got all the major locations. There might have been a couple of small spots that we missed, but for the most part, we got everything. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.